Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. He hit it. Ja Morant, insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parish. This is a difficult episode of Grits and Grinds. There are a lot of things that the Grizzlies are currently going through. Obviously, we have the on-court product. We have a couple of very painful losses on the basketball court, and then beyond the specific games, there is the situation with Ja Morant, and also there's the season-ending injury to Brandon Clarke. We are going through a lot. Brandon Clarke is going through a lot. Ja Morant is going through a lot. So I'll try to get through all of it on this episode. I consider doing like a Ja Morant, Brandon Clarke only episode, but honestly, it didn't seem fun. And basically, I'm in basketball podcasting because I find basketball a joy. I find the Grizzlies a joy. They're my favorite team. Clearly, I love talking about them. And I feel like I can talk about their on-court product, a lot of it with some form of confidence, and, you know, I have definitive opinions on things. I don't know everything, but I try to do it in an entertaining manner. But then there's stuff beyond basketball that's hard to talk about, and I almost never want to editorialize. I want to give my opinion on basketball things, but I don't have the experience or the information to talk about non-basketball things. But unfortunately, this Ja Morant situation kind of falls in the non-basketball stuff. So I'm going to go through the information as objectively and as straightforward as I can. And then I will talk a little bit about what I think it means for the Grizzlies on the basketball court. And then, of course, I can talk about what losing Brandon Clarke, what I think that means to the Grizzlies. And then, of course, we'll talk about these basketball games, the Clippers game and the Nuggets game, two games that had very, very similar endings as the Grizzlies gave up huge leads. Now, to set up all the Ja Morant information, to set up Ja Morant announcing he's leaving the team for a couple of games. Well, he will be away from the team. I should be careful about saying Ja Morant is leaving the team. Ja Morant announced, or I guess the order it happened, the Grizzlies announced that Ja Morant would be away from the team for at least 2 games. Now, this was reported in lots of places as the Grizzlies have suspended Ja Morant for 2 games. We should be careful, I think, to clarify a lot of this information, that the Grizzlies did not suspend him as far as we know. The Grizzlies released a very short, terse statement saying that Ja Morant would be away from the team for at least 2 games. It did not say whether or not that was a voluntary thing that Ja Morant was doing on his own, if it was something that the Grizzlies forced that they were going to do. We do not know if the league had anything that they weighed in on it. I would say no. The league has announced through their spokesperson, Mike Bass, that they are investigating what happened early Saturday morning, late Friday night with Ja Morant, where he appeared to show a gun on his Instagram Live. But the first bit of this was the Grizzlies announced that, just quote, Ja Morant will be away from the team for at least the next 2 games. Not a suspension that we know of. Then Ja Morant released his own statement saying, "I take full responsibility for my actions last night. I'm sorry to my family, teammates, coaches, fan partners, the city of Memphis, and the entire Grizzlies organization for letting you down. I'm going to take some time away to get help and work on learning better methods of dealing with stress and my overall well-being." All of this, of course, is a culmination of a series of events. And for Ja Morant, obviously, it's a culmination of just life, what has happened to him up until this point. Now, again, I don't want to editorialize the bits of information that all of us have, the public knowledge, the things that are shared with us only give us, a partial picture. There's no way any of us have all the information needed to fully assess, one, what's going on with Ja Morant, what actually happened in all of these situations. And so it's hard to draw a lot of conclusions. But we should, I think, I should at least set up the stories of incidents and how it led to Ja Morant having to take some personal time away from the team. Now, I haven't talked about a lot of this stuff on the show because, again, it's not my interest. I try to be a basketball-only thing. But some of these stories, they weren't corroborated. There was, of course, the story with this minor, an incident, a confrontation with a 17-year-old from last summer. Now, this made like TMZ and everything last summer, and because there was no police, no charges were filed, it went away. It's easy as a fan to be like, all right, maybe nothing happened. Of course, I don't know what happened. I don't know these players, but we'll feel like, all right, they kind of discredited the person who was making the accusations. No charges were filed. So let's just say, all right, maybe something happened, but maybe it's not that big of a deal. Well, the Washington Post last week ran this story again where they had the police reports about what happened. And there was some talk about a gun being brandished. Now, the police investigated and did not press charges because they couldn't corroborate there was a gun. There was the incident with the Indiana Pacers team bus. I did talk about that on the show. The Grizzlies said, nothing really happened. Ja Morant said it was, quote, cap, the accusations that there was a gun involved or a laser scope pointed at the team bus. What I said on this show back then about it was something happened. The facts that are agreed upon is there was at least a verbal confrontation. And something happened to the degree that the Grizzlies suspended Ja Morant's friend from attending games at the FedEx Forum for a year. So again, for me, not being there, not having firsthand information, just being able to take the publicly agreed upon information, we can just say, all right, something happened to the point that Ja Morant's friend got suspended. Then the Washington Post article had this story about we'll call it an incident or a confrontation between Ja Morant and people around him and a mall security guard. All of this, there are police reports, so it's public knowledge. So the Washington Post vets and makes sure they have these things perfectly in line and they have their facts straight so they can run the story. Whether or not any of this means anything, that's where people get in arguments over, none of this stuff means anything, and these stories are made up, and people are trying to bring Ja Morant down. That's the kind of thing I'm not going to get involved with, because, again, I have no firsthand knowledge. But anyways, all that information, I think, is useful for kind of setting the stage for what happened and why Ja Morant stepped away from the team, because all this stuff comes out last week to the point where Ja Morant's agent releases a statement about it, saying all of these alleged incidents with the firearm were fully investigated, and no one was ever able to corroborate that a firearm was involved in any of these things. So that statement comes out last Wednesday. Well, late Friday night, early Saturday morning, Ja Morant is showing off his pistol on Instagram, or what looks like a pistol. Ja Morant's in a club, in public, at a nightclub, waving a gun around. And that's highly concerning behavior. And that's not like me trying to come up with a moral position or an anti-gun position. It has very little to do with gun ownership. It has very little to do with self-defense. It's hard for me to relate. Obviously, I'm not a rich NBA athlete. I'm also not from gun culture. My family never had guns. But of course, it's not just a situation of owning a gun or gun ownership. This is brandishing a weapon in public at a nightclub where people are drinking. That is, I believe we can say objectively, troubling behavior. It's also not the form of behavior that the Grizzlies want to see from the face of their franchise, that the NBA wants to see. It feels like, it looks like this is irresponsible activity. And that's where I think, just as a general observer, you can be like, it seems like Ja Morant is a little bit troubled. Now, of course, I'm not an expert about behavioral stuff, emotional stuff, but this is erratic behavior. It's irresponsible behavior, and it's troubling, and that's how all this breaks out. Now we start thinking, when this news breaks on Saturday morning, like, what's going to happen? Is Ja Morant going to get suspended? Is the league going to step in? Like, the league is fined suspended players for stuff they put on their social media. The league takes, I believe, waving weapons around very, very seriously. So all of that led to the situation where Ja Morant then announces he's going to step away from the team. And of course, like, you have to highlight, to do this days after, your agent has to release a statement saying none of the alleged incidents with firearms have ever been corroborated, to then go on live video showing off a firearm is an unfortunate situation, I guess, is the most careful way to say it. Will the league suspend him further? I don't know. Will he miss more than 2 games? It kind of feels like he's going to miss more than 2 games. It feels like the gravity of the situation honestly demands more than 2 games. But now I'm just going into conjecture and things I don't know anything about. Like, don't listen to me for like opinions on this stuff. Listen to the players who've been there, or other athletes, entertainers who've been in similar situations. I thought Jalen Rose spoke very eloquently on this, about the troubles, the stresses, the anxieties of being a young breadwinner for your friends and your family, and then facing the stresses of just basketball and the off the court stuff beyond basketball, and feeling like you're a target for crime, and feeling like you need to have guns around you and guns on you. And again, I can't relate to this stuff, so don't listen to me, or don't listen to others editorialize about it, who don't have that information. I do think, again, using the information that we have that's been shared, we can kind of sympathize with what's going on. I understand people who are cynical about PR statements. Like, clearly Ja's statement is a crafted PR thing, but also that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to craft a good statement when you try to make amends, when you go into a healing process. Is it fair to highlight that Ja Morant's statement specifically apologizes just for last night? His apology says, I take full responsibility for my actions last night. Maybe that's not important. But Ja Morant, going to be away from the team. The Grizzlies, without Ja Morant, lost to the Clippers on Sunday night. The Grizzlies, without Ja Morant, are going to struggle. Steven Adams remains out. Apparently there's been no setback for his injury, but he's now been out 6 weeks. And he's not going to play on Tuesday, according to Drew Hill from the Daily Memphian. The Ja Morant story is huge, and you're hearing it everywhere. And honestly, I don't think there's much more I need to say or have to say about it. Just the Grizzlies are without Ja Morant for a while. Nike came out with a statement, said we appreciate Ja's accountability and that he's taking the time to get the help he needs. We support his prioritization of his well-being. We all feel that way, right? We want Ja Morant to be well. When we piece together the little glimpses we see of these stories of the things that he puts for consumption on the internet. By the way, Ja Morant has disabled his Instagram and his Twitter. When we see the little glimpses, we say, all right, part of this feels like someone who's not well. And again, that's just putting together the pieces from our own personal views as lay people. Waving a gun in a club feels like not well on the heels of the other things that were going on. The unimaginable stresses that Ja goes through, hard to relate to. Don't know what that's like. So we all wish him well. The other bit of news that's a huge bummer beyond Ja Morant going through what he's going through right now is that Brandon Clarke tore his Achilles in the game against the Nuggets. And he will obviously miss the whole season. And if you know anything about Achilles injuries, he'll probably miss most of next season too. Very, very sadly, you have to be aware of the fact that athletes coming back from Achilles injuries don't always fully recover their athleticism. I mean, I think it's fair to say they usually do not fully recover their athleticism. And Brandon Clarke is a player who depends heavily on his athleticism. I mean, all NBA players do, but his skill is not jump shooting. His skill is not passing. His skill is being a high flyer. So this loss of Brandon Clarke, it's obviously devastating for Brandon. It's devastating for this Grizzlies team this year. It's maybe devastating is too strong of a word. It's very bad for the Grizzlies team next year. My basketball analysis of not having Brandon Clarke, I think the Grizzlies, when fully healthy, when Steven Adams comes back, should be able to endure the loss of not having Brandon Clarke in the regular season. But in my opinion, there's no question that Brandon Clarke is a better fit for this team than Xavier Tillman is, despite Xavier Tillman doing a great job as a starter recently. The Grizzlies' ceiling with Brandon Clarke is higher than their ceiling without Brandon Clarke. It's been why I've been quoting Brandon Clarke lineup stats on this show for 3 years or so. Not having Brandon Clarke this season takes away one of the avenues the Grizzlies have to win basketball games. One of the benefits of depth, one of the reasons I disliked this past offseason for the Grizzlies, is the less depth you have, the fewer paths to victory you have. Like the Grizzlies' primary path to victory is their starting lineup being great. And that's going to continue to be their primary source of hope and way they win basketball games. Your primary path to victory is Ja Morant's going to be a superstar. Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to be a defensive freak and an offensive mismatch. Bane's going to fill it up on the wing. If Bane is off, well then, all right, we have some other avenues where if Bane is off, Ja Morant can have a huge night. Jaren Jackson can pick up the slack. Steven Adams can have a huge rebounding game. Dylan Brooks can pick it up. If Dylan's in a big slump or if he's suspended for picking up too many technical fouls, well then, maybe Bane goes off. Maybe Jaren goes off. Maybe Tyus Jones has a massive game. These are different pathways to victory. But as your depth gets chipped away, you have fewer options. Like, oh, if Dylan's not playing and Steven Adams isn't playing and Bane has a big game, he can pick up some slack, and Jones can pick up some slack, and Jaren can pick up some slack, but we still need more. It's not going to be enough. A very obvious example for this is last year's playoff series against the Timberwolves, where Brandon Clarke swung that series. The Grizzlies probably do not beat the Timberwolves last year if Brandon Clarke isn't on the roster. Brandon Clarke averaged 16.5 points per game in that series, 9.5 rebounds per game, 2.7 assists per game, a block and a steal. He made 68% of his field goals. The Grizzlies turned away from Steven Adams, and they had another avenue to victory they could try out. It was Brandon Clarke, and that's what got him there. When Jaren Jackson Jr. gets in foul trouble in the playoffs, you had this option. All right, we can turn to Brandon Clarke. Well, it's no longer there. This season when Steven Adams isn't there, well, now our front court is decimated. When Jaren Jackson Jr. gets in foul trouble in the playoffs, we have fewer and fewer options. So I think the loss of Brandon Clarke is massive for this Grizzlies team. If fully healthy, perhaps they can endure it. If fully healthy, where you have Steven Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr. starting and you got Xavier Tillman and Santialdama as your bench bigs, maybe you would go just as far in the playoffs as you would have gone if Brandon Clarke were healthy. But I think your odds of advancing past the second round have diminished without Brandon Clarke. Your odds of winning in the first round have diminished without Brandon Clarke. The shortcomings the Grizzlies showed in the game against the Clippers without Steven Adams, it's rebounding. And frankly, the Grizzlies' second unit, this is again, their new fully healthy second unit is Tyus Jones, Luke Kennard, somebody at the 3, David Roddy or Zaire Williams, probably, and then Santialdama and Xavier Tillman. That lineup is going to get destroyed on the defensive glass. They're going to give up a lot of second chance scoring. Brandon Clarke was one of your remaining energy guys, one of your shot blockers, one of your steals guys, one of your rebounders. You've now lost one more of those guys. Your depth has gotten ruined. Like right now, it's hard not to view this Grizzlies team. And I know we're going through a hard time. It's okay. We're all going through a hard time right now as Grizzlies fans. Ja Morant's going through a hard time on his own. Brandon Clarke's going through a horrible time on his own with this injury. The Grizzlies players understand. They've got a lot going on. They're hurting for their teammates, Brandon and Ja. They're also probably upset they lost some basketball games where they had leads. But it's hard as a Grizzlies fan, as an outsider, to not look at this team right now and be like, this is last year's team minus Brandon Clarke, Kyle Anderson, and D'Anthony Melton. Or we have Santi Aldama and Luke Kennard in the place of Brandon Clarke, D'Anthony Melton, and Kyle Anderson. And it's not a great feeling. One of the reasons most people, or a lot of people, were pretty underwhelmed with the Grizzlies offseason was you've hurt your depth. And it's probably not fair to count a season-ending injury against the front office. Like, you don't plan on a guy blowing his Achilles out. But you did know Jaren was hurt when the season started. And you did know you're probably a little shorthanded in the front court if one or two guys are out. And you went ahead and used a roster spot on, like, Kennedy Chandler, a developmental undersized point guard project. You used 2 roster spots on Jake LaRavia and David Roddy. Those guys feel a little bit redundant to have them both. I mean, Zaire Williams is a shell of a basketball player right now. Maybe they couldn't have seen that coming. But like, you signed John Conchar, your 11th or 12th man from last year, to a 4-year extension. You signed through 2028. You're using 5 roster spots on Jake LaRavia, David Roddy, Kennedy Chandler, John Conchar, and Zaire Williams. All players who I think it was fair to assume in the offseason that those guys, there's a strong likelihood those guys aren't going to help you get out of the second round of the playoffs. Maybe not even the first round. And now you had this catastrophic injury to Brandon Clarke. It's some bad luck. Clearly it's bad luck. But now 40% of your roster, it might not help you win a playoff series, which is a little bleak. It's a little bit bleak right now. Like, even when Steven Adams comes back, I think they're going to have a hard time. They're going to have a hard time getting the stops on the glass, cleaning the glass, as they say. I know it's going to get better. This is essentially a nadir moment for this iteration of the Grizzlies team. All the optimism of last season, and we knew coming in, hey, we have the weight of expectations now. It's going to feel hard. But then now you add the stuff Ja's going through. You add in Brandon Clarke with, maybe the worst injury that NBA athletes can have. It's all going to feel pretty awful. It's a pretty brutal weekend to be a Grizzlies fan. Anyways, let's take a break. We need a break. Let's take a break, and then I'll talk a little bit about these Clippers and Nuggets games. There was some fun stuff in these games, man. There was some great stats I'm gonna share with you about the Clippers game before it all fell apart. We'll do that right after this short break. All Grizz all the time. Stay connected and follow at MemGrizz and at Grind City Media across all social channels, including Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, for breaking news, one-of-a-kind content, and all the perspectives you won't find anywhere else. All right, so on Friday night, the Grizzlies had this huge game against the Denver Nuggets. Things were going pretty well for the Grizzlies. You'd beaten the Nuggets, you'd beaten the Lakers, you'd beaten the Rockets. You had a nice little 3-game win streak. You'd won 5 straight games Western Conference. Now you're heading out to Denver, a very, very tough place to play. You understand if you lose this game, you basically have lost the 1 seed. There's basically no chance of you catching up because this decides the season series. You play very, very well. Have a good first half, have a good third quarter. It's tied going into the fourth quarter. Now, maybe weighing on them was the fact that Brandon Clarke got hurt in this game. Obviously, it seemed apparent at the time. Like, that's a huge injury. We all assumed and guessed that looked like an Achilles tear. So, you have that weighing on you if you're a Grizzlies player. But the Grizzlies go into the fourth quarter, and we've highlighted this for a while now. The Grizzlies have struggled in fourth quarters. They struggle in fourth quarters when they're up by a ton and it's just garbage time. They also struggle in fourth quarters when it's close and they're playing good teams. And in this fourth quarter, the Grizzlies only had 11 points until the final minute of that fourth quarter. They got hammered by the Nuggets in the fourth quarter. They ended up losing the fourth quarter 33-17. They were about to have the lowest scoring half of the season, but Vince Williams and Jake LaRavia each hit garbage time threes in the final minute to give them the team a total of 39 points for the half. That still tied them for their lowest scoring second half of the season. The Nuggets outscored the Grizzlies 16-0 in the fourth quarter from about the 8.5 minute mark to the 5 minute mark. We're trying to highlight, what's going on with the Grizzlies' fourth quarters. Ja Morant, he had a big game, had 27 points, 10 assists, but he checks out. You have these second unit lineups that just aren't working that well. Like Tyus Jones, before his huge game against the Clippers, Tyus Jones in the game against the Nuggets on Friday went scoreless off the bench. I mean, the Grizzlies are starting again. They're starting what I consider to be good non-Ja Morant lineups. They started the fourth quarter against the Nuggets with Tyus Jones, Desmond Bane, John Conchard, Dillon Brooks, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Now, they're playing a little bit of small ball here. You guys know I don't like small ball for the Grizzlies with the players they have, but they're playing small ball out of necessity because Brandon Clarke is injured. Could they have kept playing Santialdama? I guess. I mean, Santialdama had a bad game in this one. Should they lean on Santi even more? I think there's an argument to be made they should. But I feel like Tyus Jones, Desmond Bane, Dillon Brooks, John Conchard, Jaren Jackson Jr. is a pretty good backup lineup. They get outscored by 5. Then they go a little bit even smaller. They go Tyus, Luke Kennard comes in for Conchard. So you have Tyus, Luke, Desmond, Dillon, and Jaren. The Nuggets are just kind of pulling away a little bit. Then, of course, Jaren picks up a foul. They sub him out with about 8 minutes left, and the bottom falls out. Nuggets run off 9 in a row, part of this 16-0 run. And lo and behold, the Grizzlies have blown another game. Another game where they had a double-digit lead. Another game where it was close in the fourth quarter, and they ended up getting just thoroughly punished in the fourth quarter. So the Grizzlies lose this game, and we're like, oh, familiar fashion. This stinks. We lost in the fourth quarter again. Then, of course, late Friday night, the next day, we have to deal as Grizzlies fans, and the Ja Morant situation breaks out. So, also, of course, in the Nuggets game, Dillon Brooks picks up his 16th technical foul of the season. That means Dillon Brooks gets suspended for the Sunday game against the Clippers. So now, as Grizzlies fans, we're going into this Clippers game on Sunday, and we're like, oh, no Ja Morant, still no Steven Adams, no Dillon Brooks. This is kind of rough. We're going to be shorthanded. We're going to have to play well. Maybe backs against the wall, we'll have something to pull out of this game. And the painful part of this, like if it was a regular Grizzlies loss or a regular just NBA loss where, hey, you hang in there, you're down by 8, you're down by 10, you end up losing, you deal with that. No one is really upset. No one's like, hey, listen, it's been a nightmare weekend. We lost the game. But of course, that isn't what happened. The Grizzlies went off in the third quarter. The Grizzlies had the second highest scoring quarter in franchise history. They dropped 51 points in the third quarter. Tyus Jones had a 20-point third quarter. Tyus Jones goes off. Desmond Bane is completely awesome this entire game. Desmond Bane finishes with 30 points, has 6 assists. The only silver lining, I guess, for Ja Morant not playing is, hey, they're going to try out these non-point guard minutes. We're going to have Desmond Bane, Luke Kennard backcourt lineups. Thought that was pretty fun. But like, Desmond Bane's going off. Luke Kennard having a revenge game against his old team is 5 for 5 for 3 from the game. Tyus has a 20-point quarter. We scored 51 in the third. We turn around this game, and we go into the fourth quarter up 15. And then it all falls apart. You give up a 24-2 run in the fourth quarter. The Grizzlies were outscored 24-2 over a 7.5-minute stretch. They go from up 14 to down 8. Yeah, there were some rough officiating moments in this one, it felt like. Some of this felt like a lot of the momentum changed when the officials changed a call after the Clippers challenged a foul call on Paul George. They reviewed it. It became an offensive foul call on Jaren Jackson Jr. I feel like if the officials looked at it in slow motion from multiple angles and came up with the result they came up with, that means that's how the rule is written. I think as Grizzlies fans and as basketball fans, we can be a little bit quizzical about why that is the rule. Yeah, Jaren's elbow hit Paul George in the face, but like Paul George's face was right up in Jaren Jackson Jr.'s space. Jaren Jackson Jr. made a normal basketball move. He was just shooting a layup. Paul George clearly fouls before the elbow contact happens. Why does the incidental elbow contact supersede the previous foul? I don't know. These are questions for the rules committee, not questions for those officials. Again, I trust if the officials looked at it in slow motion, that's what the rule is. They adjudicated that play the way it's called, or the way the rule is written. But that felt like a big play, and the Grizzlies failed to score. And now the Grizzlies have another fourth quarter collapse. And if you count that run, all right, they were outscored 24-2 in a 7.5-minute stretch in the fourth quarter against the Clippers. If you combine the exact same time frames between the fourth quarter against the Clippers and the fourth quarter against the Nuggets, and this is the most cherry-picked stat ever. I'm talking about in the Grizzlies' last two games, from 8:59 left in the fourth quarter to 1:35 left in the fourth quarter. Over the past two games, in that exact time frame, the Grizzlies have been outscored 49-7. That's 24-2 against the Clippers in that time frame and 25-5 against the Nuggets in that time frame. If you don't want to cherry pick the numbers, just say over the past two games, the Grizzlies have been outscored 71-34 in the fourth quarter. Over the last two games, the Grizzlies have a 73 offensive rating in the fourth quarter and a 151 defensive rating. The Grizzlies are recovering less than 1/4 of all rebounds in the fourth quarters over the past two games. I mean, it's a season-long problem. It's also specifically a problem for the Grizzlies when Steven Adams is not there. In the past 17 games that Steven Adams has missed, the Grizzlies are 7-10, but in those fourth quarters, the Grizzlies have a 97 offensive rating and a 122 defensive rating, a minus 24.8 net rating. The offensive rating numbers and the net rating numbers are the worst in the NBA by a lot. The Grizzlies in these 17 games without Steven Adams in fourth quarters are also last in the NBA in rebound percentage. The Grizzlies in the Clippers game got out-rebounded by 27. That's the second largest rebound disparity in Grizzlies franchise history, tied for the second largest. Got out-rebounded by 27. The Grizzlies got no offensive rebounds in the first half. They finished with 2. The Grizzlies lost the second chance scoring battle, 21-2. For the season, and some of this, of course, it's blowouts where your garbage time offense is bad, but also it's those close games where your offense is just bad. But for the entire season, the Grizzlies are 30th in fourth quarter offensive rating and 29th in fourth quarter net rating. It's a hard way to win when you can't get rebounds. The Grizzlies made 18 three-pointers, led by Luke Kennard going 5 for 5. The Grizzlies made 18 three-pointers, their second most in a game this season, still lost. They shot over 50% from three. They shot over 50% overall. This is just their second loss in the last two seasons when getting 30 or more assists. They scored 129 points and lost. You know, the Grizzlies normally win, 96% of their games when they score 120 or more. But all these stats, of course, they're not predictive, and they don't show anything special about the Grizzlies. This Grizzlies team, no Dillon Brooks, no Steven Adams, no Ja Morant, it's not really the same Grizzlies team. It's slightly different. And this Grizzlies team is going to struggle getting those defensive stops, is going to struggle cleaning the defensive glass. But you give credit. You give credit for the team for fighting. You give credit for Tyus Jones having a huge game. 25 points, 12 assists, and 5 steals. This is the fourth 20-10 game of this season for Tyus Jones. Remember, he had 0 coming into this season. Tyus also got 5 steals. This was the second game in Grizzlies franchise history where a player has at least 20 points, 10 assists, and 5 steals. It is the first one in the Memphis era. Ja Morant's never done this. Mike Conley never did this. The only other player in Grizzlies franchise history to have a game with 20 points, 10 assists, and 5 steals is Greg Anthony in Vancouver in 1997. This is just the second game in the NBA this season where a player had 25 points, 12 assists, and 5 steals. De'Aaron Fox had the other one. He also did it, interestingly, against the Clippers. He did it in a double overtime game, the 176-175 game. One thing weird about the Tyus Jones performance, like he's averaging this year as a starter, he's averaging 19.4 points per game and 8.1 assists per game plus 2.7 steals per game. But coming off the bench, he's been pretty bad of late. Like he goes from 0 off the bench on Friday night to doing 25 points. Of course, that 20-point quarter. Highest scoring quarter of his career, of course. Reminder, first 6 seasons Tyus Jones played in the NBA, he had 1 20-point game. Now he's been racking them up the last couple seasons. A very impressive development for Tyus Jones. But unfortunately, Tyus did not score in the fourth quarter. The Grizzlies only scored 17 in that fourth quarter. They had 5 turnovers. 4 total rebounds. Gave up 38 points. I mean, the Grizzlies gave up over 30 points in each quarter. Each quarter of this game, the Clippers scored 30 or more. It's not going to be a winning formula. I mean, not to be too down again, but like Luke Kennard in this game, 5 for 5 from 3. Great. But this game kind of perfectly highlighted how I was just like not super excited to acquire Luke Kennard because of the limitations of the players, not of Luke Kennard. I mean, not specifically of Luke Kennard, but the limitations of the players you already had on your squad. You already had wings who are not particularly good at team rebounding, who are already a little limited on length. And if you're playing, like even guys who didn't play this game, like Dylan Brooks not a good team rebounder. If you're already a little bit limited in size with Dylan Brooks and with Tyus Jones and with Desmond Bane and with like Zaire Williams not grabbing rebound. Like Zaire Williams played in this game. Again, first half, they gave him a go. 3 fouls, nothing else. David Roddy got to start in this game. David Roddy, we're not sure about his team rebounding prowess yet. But so far, the numbers aren't awesome. And it's like, if you already have Roddy and you already have Bane and you already have Zaire and you already have Dylan Brooks and you already have Tyus, you already have Ja, I don't know what another short wingspan guard is going to get you. Yeah, hopefully you can score some points, but you can't get stops. In this game, you scored points, you couldn't get stops. I fear it's gonna continue to be a thing for the rest of the season. Like, it's not gonna be this bad. The Grizzlies are gonna start winning some games. The Grizzlies they're gonna play the Lakers on Tuesday night. By the way, Tuesday night doing a playback over at playback.tv/fastbreakbreakfast. Going to do a playback for the first half of that game. If you've never done that before, just log in with your TV provider credentials, and you can watch the game there in the browser window, and I'll be providing commentary. Also, John from Fast Break Breakfast will be there. Also, probably I'll get a Lakers guy in there, a Lakers fan, to make it, fun, a little bit more objective, hopefully. But you play the Lakers, big game. Unfortunately, you got to keep playing this. They're still in the gauntlet. That 11-game gauntlet after the All-Star break. We're in the midst of it. We're just a few games in. So you got Warriors coming up. You got Mavericks coming up. Not knowing when players are going to return, not knowing when Ja Morant's going to be back, it's hard to be super optimistic right now. The Grizzlies are right now on pace to not hit their win total over. They are now on pace to win 49 games. It's going to be a fight to hold off the Kings or maybe the Suns for the 2 seed. Santialdama in this game, again, not his best moment. I also thought it was interesting that with no Brandon Clarke, obviously know Steven Adams, that maybe Santi would play even more. They would lean heavily on Santi. They did not. He played 19 minutes. Played basically his normal stuff. We thought, all right, if you want to try to come up with a silver lining for no Brandon Clarke, you're like, all right, maybe we'll unleash the Santi and Jaren minutes. Well, they played some Santi and Jaren minutes. They went horribly. They got outscored by 13 in the 6 minutes they played. Their two-man net rating before the game, they were plus 34 in, I want to say, it was 142 possessions. Now, after this one, they're just plus 23.8. Still awesome, but their overall season-long net rating went down by 10 points. They're plus 23.8 in 160 possessions. I have a hard time coming up with any silver linings for the Brandon Clarke injury. I just feel so bad for Brandon the person. I feel like the Grizzlies lost their ceiling for as good as they can get. Of course, they lost what I think is the Grizzlies' best five-man lineup. Brandon Clarke was a part of that. It is a bigger opportunity for Xavier Tillman and Santialdama. So that is for those guys. It's more of an opportunity, maybe more of a development period. But again, I have a hard time seeing a silver lining. Even for the offseason, it's like, what do you do in the offseason? Do you have to get another big? Well, the Grizzlies roster is full. If you bring back Dylan Brooks, your roster is full for next year. We keep talking about the consolidation trade. Maybe something's going to happen, but very little silver linings towards the Brandon Clarke stuff. I guess wrapping up this kind of a bummer of a show. The silver lining for Ja Morant, it's obvious. Just he gets his life better. Like he heals up, becomes a better person. That's what we're cheering for. Anyways, thanks for listening to these shows, even the bummer ones. If you want to help me out, you can do that by subscribing to the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the Grits and Grinds YouTube channel. Come out to the playback at playback.tv/fastbreak breakfast for that Lakers game. And we will get some victories and we'll get it going again. I mean, I guess I should recognize, by the way, Jaren Jackson Jr. was awesome. Jaren Jackson Jr. was awesome in the Clippers game. I think a rightful criticism could be that they didn't find a way to get him the ball more in the fourth quarter. When they weren't scoring in the fourth quarter, he didn't seem very involved. But Jaren had 24 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. I do think the last 2-minute report is going to say he got fouled on Paul George's offensive rebound, where the Grizzlies were down 2 with about 30 seconds left. He needed to get that rebound, but it looked like Paul George fouled him pretty hard. That basically put the game away. Unlucky break for the Grizzlies when they desperately needed some form of a break. Anyways, I hope you have a great Monday. I will talk to you soon. Go Grizz.